Many of you will have known about the Learning Challenge curriculum because you may well have used it some time ago. I just want to take these few moments to explain to you how the Learning Challenge has changed drastically in the last couple of years. In the past, the Learning Challenge for history, geography, and science really had a book associated with them. The new Learning Challenge allows room for that book to continue, but doesn't dominate it in the same way. The main reason for that is since the 2019 Ofsted framework came into being, there has been much greater emphasis on helping children to become historians, geographers, scientists, artists, technologists, etc., etc. And that required us to rethink the way we were actually setting out the Learning Challenge. So what I want to do in this little session is to explain to you how those changes will have occurred. Now, naturally, I won't be able to explain everything to you, but I hope that in these few moments together, I'll be able to get the main changes across to you. So I'm going to use, if I may, the share screen for a second and bring up the bit I want to share with you so that you actually have a better understanding of what I'm talking about. So first of all, I want to explain that in the original Learning Challenge, we use quite interesting titles such as Why Do Meerkats Not Live in the North Pole? Since the Education Endowment Foundation did its research, it became quite clear that it was important that we really got across to our children what the main learning was all about. We've held firm with the questioning because we felt that was really important. But we now have a big question, such as how did Britain change between the end of the Iron Age and the beginning of the end of the Roman occupation, which really explains that we're really focusing on that area. So we've gone away from the is there anybody out there, which was the space example that we had before, to a much more this is what we're actually learning in this particular session. This is then accompanied by up to 5 components, bite-sized pieces of learning that we think is important for children to get this big question. Here, for instance, we really focus heavily on the evidence there is in the country to show that the Romans were here in the first place. We end particularly with a high focus on children knowing the legacy left by the Romans at the end of their occupation of the UK. In geography, similarly, we've actually gone with the big question, which in this case for year 1 children is about knowing about the UK and where they live. They have these 5 components that supports that learning and really helps them understand more about where they live and the things to look out for. We also have really focused much more heavily on developing a progression map for the disciplinary side for each of the subjects. So the history one, which is the example I'm showing you here, as you can see, has broken into 4 big areas: how we deal with timelines, what do we understand about chronology, how do we look at the evidence base, and the interpretation and significance of the learning they're actually looking at. Now, this runs all the way from reception right through to the end of year 6. And is set out in the way that I've shown you here. This enables our children to really begin to understand more about being historians. Similarly, in geography, we have 3 areas and helps them to be much more focused on becoming geographers. Alongside this, we've also enabled you to really have an assessment opportunity to go with each of the units. The one on Romans, for instance, is outlined here. And you'll notice, like a kind of almost like a quiz idea, we actually have a multi-choice answer support system for them. So each question will have a set of opportunities for them to decide which statements are true and which are not true. In this first case, for instance, there are 2 statements there that actually are quite true. The children recognize them. But the first 10 questions in each of the quizzes we have are all what I call the substantive knowledge side. This is the knowledge part of the curriculum. However, we've also included at least 2 disciplinary knowledge questions, which in this case around the Romans shows them what life was like in Britain during the end of the Iron Age period and what life was like at exactly the same time in Rome, and got the children to consider the major differences between the two. In the second of them, we've given them a view, some artifacts in some cases, but also some examples of what's left from the Roman time and helped children to really understand more about what it is that we can actually say the Romans were like during our occupation. The end part, which I'm showing you now, is simply the way the children would fill in the answers for themselves. However, alongside that, we've also actually created at the end of each unit a recommendation for what we call the show it side. So here, for instance, the children focusing on the Romans would really take each of the 5 components that I showed you earlier and bullet point some information they now know about these. So for instance, why did the Romans leave Britain? They can bullet point what their views are of why they actually left. Now, this is kind of a way of ensuring that remembering more is actually very active within the learning challenge. It's one of the few ways. We also have a set of retrieval questions which children will look after the time they finish the unit of learning. We really recommend a very clear way of working, which really ensures that they are actually looking at their prior knowledge before they start, that each of the new bits of learning have checkpoints within them for them to double check that they really understand what we're doing as we go on. Before we move to the show it at the end of the unit of learning, which is the example that I've got here, and obviously then onto the retrieval activities. We've also actually made new movements, and the new movements are, we are continually actually making amendments. We're now looking more at the golden threads. So for instance, we've recognized 6 major golden threads within the history curriculum. We have some for geography, but in the history curriculum, we're focusing on monarchy, for instance. Societies and civilization is another thread that we'd like to see running through, as indeed would trade, which would actually link nicely with the geography curriculum. Inventions is another area. And conflict or invasion is the 5th, followed by legacy, which because of these people or because of this period of time, what legacy has been left for us today? So basically, the main difference you will see if you're already subscribed to the Learning Challenge, we are shifting. You can still stick with this if you want to. This is the way the Stone Age unit of learning looks like currently, with the big question being how did it change between the beginning of the Stone Age to the end of the Iron Age? However, we've made some adjustments. Virtually, it looks the same, except clearly the first one, which is all about disciplinary learning, which is all about finding the evidence that tells us how do we know about the Stone Age people, putting a huge focus on Skara Brae and, of course, if you want to, Stonehenge, okay? The second one, which is what were the main differences between the Stone, Bronze and Iron Ages, really now we're going to focus much more on societies. What was it like in that Stone Age to live during that period of time? What was it like during the Bronze Age? What was it like during the Iron Age? Moving hopefully to children, helping them understand that communities in reality started around the Iron Age period more so than the Stone Age period. The next one, which is exactly the same as in the previous one, the significance of the discovery of iron ore and the invention of the wheel, quite naturally really focus heavily on invention. Then we have one which is very much focused on the Iron Age hill forts, but we now want to twist that. So we really focus on them being a kind of a way of keeping safe from conflict as being the major thread that runs through that one. And we finally, rather than looking at the hunter-gatherers as in the previous one, we want children to say, as a result of the Stone Age period, what do we find we're benefiting from today? So the legacy side will come across very strongly. So the major kind of way of working from our point of view is to take account of obviously the Rosenshine thinking that's been going on, the Education Endowment Foundation's research, the DFE recommendation, and what has come across also in the Ofsted framework, although we recognise that that may well change in the near future. However, what we are recognising is that we're having more of our children really becoming historians, really becoming geographers, and really becoming scientists as they work with us through the learning challenge. I hope this brief explanation has at least enticed you to go onto our website and look at exactly how that would work. So effectively, what we have are units of work in history, geography, and science, which mirrors what is expected in the national curriculum, and I think takes it much further beyond that as well. Thank you for listening. I hope that's been helpful to you.